There are reports of a ceasefire in Gaza. Okay, the White House says Gaza ceasefire deal could happen before Trump becomes president. Jake Sullivan cites progress in Qatar talks, says accord may come this week. And this is a image from today, Monday, January 13th, 2025. The Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar, a genocidal monster, who is on the right, with his Danish counterpart, Lars Løkke Rasmussen, speaking to the media in Jerusalem on Monday, January 13th. That is today. I'm going to read for you this quote from this article. White House officials expressed cautious optimism Monday that a deal to pause 15 months of grinding war, what we call genocide, in the Gaza Strip and secure the release of Israeli and other foreign hostages held by Hamas could be struck in the final week of President Joe Biden's term in office. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said he was more hopeful about a ceasefire deal now than at any time since the war in the Palestinian enclave erupted following on October 6th, 2023, that left more than 1,200 people dead and 250 taken hostage. We are close to a deal, he said, and it can get done this week. I'm not making a promise or a prediction, but it is there for the taking. We are going to work to make it happen. Somebody said, I look clean. No Diddy. Thank you. That's great. Let's go ahead and continue with this article. Mr. Biden wants to reach a ceasefire before he leaves the White House on January 20th and turns over authority to President-elect Donald Trump. On Sunday, he discussed the ongoing negotiations in Doha, Qatar, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, and the weakening of Iran's power in the region have fundamentally changed the current dynamic in the Middle East, Mr. Biden told his Israeli counterpart, U.S. officials said. Quote, he stressed the immediate need for a ceasefire in Gaza and return of the hostages with a surge in humanitarian aid enabled by a stoppage in the fighting under the deal, the White House said following the telephone conversation. Some observers are urging that expectations of a breakthrough in Gaza be tempered. On multiple occasions, talks have stalled just as negotiators led by the U.S., Egyptian, and Qatari officials predicted they were on the verge of a deal. However, the imminent arrival of Mr. Trump to the White House has added a new element to the equation. He has warned Hamas that there would be unspecified hell to pay if they did not release the estimated 100 hostages still not accounted for before he takes office. Okay, so what sort of hell? What could possibly be worse for the people of Gaza? They're already experiencing a genocide. Trump is saying if there isn't a deal before I get into office, which at this point is by next Monday, if there isn't a deal by then there will be more genocide. I mean, there isn't really much that he can do. But he's obviously saying that to apply pressure on Hamas in order to agree to a ceasefire. Now, he isn't only applying pressure on Hamas, he's also applying pressure on Netanyahu, okay? I want to show you guys this post that Netanyahu has. I'm sure many of you have seen it, but on Truth Social, which is Trump's version of X, okay? He posted a video of Jeffrey Sachs, economist Jeffrey Sachs, bashing the state of Israel, its influence in America, the destructive influence it's had on producing wars in the Middle East that the U.S. has had to fight. And he called Netanyahu a curse word. Okay, so this is very, very serious. Very few presidents would ever admit to listening to Jeffrey Sachs, let alone share his content on their social media. Donald Trump is doing that because he's trying to also put pressure on Netanyahu because, as you all know, he is one of the reasons why we haven't had a deal. Netanyahu is obviously delaying a deal. So let's go ahead and watch this quick video. It's going to break down what happened. Okay, so as you guys can see here, Trump shared a shocking video slamming the Israeli prime minister. In the video, American economist Jeffrey Sachs, who you can see here on the screen, can be heard abusing Benjamin Netanyahu. You could call it abusing for sure. He was roasting him and bashing him. He calls him a deep, dark son of a B word. I won't curse because I don't want to get demonetized, but that's what he calls him. And he does so. Okay, I'm just going to cut the music here. It's kind of annoying. He posted the clip on his Truth Social platform. So you can see here, Wall Street Apes shared this video, and then Trump took it and posted it to his own social media. And in that video, Jeffrey Sachs accused Netanyahu of goading the ex-U.S. President George Bush into the war in Iraq and trying to push for U.S. intervention in Syria and Iran. And so basically Jeffrey Sachs is keeping it real like he always does. And he says he's still trying to get us to fight Iran this day, this week. This is President Trump acknowledging this and sharing this on purpose, okay? Because he's trying to put pressure on Netanyahu. And he says here, Netanyahu is a deep, dark son of a B word because he's got us into endless wars. Okay, Netanyahu not happy, obviously, to see Donald Trump sharing this information. And then they provide some context. They say, yeah, Trump was a close ally of Netanyahu, and Trump sanctioned Iran at Netanyahu's request. He moved the U.S. embassy into Israel in West Jerusalem. He brokered the Abraham Accords, which led to Israel normalizing with Morocco, the UAE, and Sudan. And yeah, so they had a close relationship. But after the last election, when Biden defeated Trump, if you remember, was calling it a fake election, that they stole the election. And before Trump could put up a fight to dispute the results, Benjamin Netanyahu was the first, okay? He was the first foreign leader to congratulate Biden, okay? So you can see here, Netanyahu's greetings came while Trump was still trying to challenge Biden's win in late 2020. And then Trump said, I liked Bibi. I still like Bibi, but I also like loyalty a lot. The first person to congratulate Biden was Bibi. And not only did he congratulate him, he did it on tape. He did it on camera. I haven't spoken to him since. F him. This is President Donald Trump. Okay, this is how he felt about Netanyahu last time. Now, obviously, the relationship has changed since that took place. But you can see that there was some tension between them, and now Trump is putting pressure on Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire, okay? Okay, so what exactly are the ceasefire details? I'm going to show you this tweet here by Dr. Samuel Arian. He says, here is the draft of the ceasefire agreement between Hamas and the Zionist regime. There is no surrender by the resistance, nor total victory for Netanyahu. Basically, it's a stalemate. And then he says, this is very much the same agreement Hamas accepted 6 months ago, before additional tens of thousands more Palestinians were massacred by the disgraceful and most immoral Zionist army in its genocidal war in Gaza, okay? This is the same exact agreement, okay? We're going to go through the details of this agreement in just a second, but give me a second before I do, okay? Look at this article from July 7th, 2024. Okay, this is 6 months ago. Hamas drops key demand to accept phased U.S. deal on ceasefire. Hamas on Saturday tentatively accepted a U.S.-backed proposal for a phased ceasefire in Gaza, abandoning its demand for an upfront commitment from Israel to end the war entirely. This is the same agreement that the U.S. proposed and brokered 6 months ago. Hamas agreed to it. And Israel now is thinking about agreeing to it. Why? Because Trump is pressuring them. And obviously everyone now, the cat is out the bag, has identified that Netanyahu was the one holding up the agreement. This was a report earlier this year. War on Gaza, Netanyahu hindering deal again by changing the demands. Every time Hamas agreed, he would move the goalposts, okay? So Netanyahu is obviously the reason why we haven't had a peace agreement. Let's go ahead and watch this video together real quick. And this is recent. Let's go ahead and take a look. You're going to see why Netanyahu is concerned. Obviously, he's been delaying it because he doesn't want to lose power. He doesn't want the government to collapse. So let's watch.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly sounding out members of his coalition government as to whether they'd quit if he signed a ceasefire and hostage deal in Gaza. There's been another weekend of protests against the Netanyahu government's handling of the negotiations, as the Prime Minister and his cabinet are accused of prolonging the war for political gain. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran is in Jerusalem.
While Benjamin Netanyahu is facing significant and sustained pressure from the international community to end the war in Gaza, given the devastating humanitarian situation in the territory, he is also facing growing domestic anger about his handling of negotiations for a ceasefire and a hostage deal, particularly with around 100 hostages still held by Hamas. That has spilled onto the streets of Tel Aviv for another weekend, with thousands demanding action from the Prime Minister and accusing him of putting off a deal because he's worried any relative peace could tear his government apart. The fragile coalition government which Benjamin Netanyahu leads includes a number of far-right members, including two he has put inside his cabinet. One of them, the National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has already threatened to quit the government if a deal is struck, saying that military pressure is the only way to bring an end to this war.
Okay, so you guys get the point. Basically, Netanyahu is under pressure domestically in the state of Israel because of the protests. The family of the hostages have been protesting for over a year. Many of those families have lost their loved ones in Gaza because Netanyahu refused to agree to a ceasefire deal. And so those protests are ongoing and mounting. But also his coalition. They have a parliamentary government system. Netanyahu, although he's the leader and it seems like he's incredibly popular, he barely won the election. He has a very small minority of the population that voted and supported for him. He only came to form a government because he had other tiny coalitions from the far right that coalesced together and formed their government. I won't go into detail about the difference between parliamentary politics and like the U.S. system, for example, but just know that Netanyahu is barely in power. Okay, so one of these far-right members that helped him form his party, his coalition, his government, is Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister of Israel. He's a far-right-wing lunatic. And then obviously Itamar Ben-Gvir, the fat pig. But look at this quote from Smotrich. Mr. Netanyahu is facing pressure from right-wing figures in his own government to reject any ceasefire deal that doesn't include the release of all hostages held by Hamas and effective Israeli security control of Gaza. Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, also the leader of the religious Zionism party, which makes up part of Netanyahu's governing coalition, called the emerging deal a catastrophe for the national security of the state of Israel. We will not be part of a surrender deal that would include releasing terrorist hostages, stopping the war, and dissolving its achievements that were brought with much blood. Yeah, a lot of blood. You committed genocide. And abandoning many hostages. And then Smotrich says here, he opposes the swap deal with Hamas, calls for opening the gates of hell on Gaza. The gates of hell have been open, and they've been going through hell already. The Palestinian people are some of the bravest and most patient and persistent people on the planet, and they've been dealing with hell from the beginning. But Smotrich apparently doesn't think it's enough. He wants to give them more. So he's against the deal, and he's putting pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. But Trump is also putting pressure on Netanyahu. So it seems like the walls are closing in. Okay, Trump is putting pressure on Netanyahu to come up to agree to a deal as well. So they are now finally re-agreeing to the same deal from 6 months ago. Let's go ahead and read the details, okay? Phase 1, which is a 42-day phase. Number 1, a temporary suspension of hostilities. Okay, no more bombs, no more guns, no more drones, no more explosions, no more killing civilians. A temporary cessation of military operations by both sides. Israeli forces will withdraw from populated areas in Gaza to a zone along the border, including Wadi Gaza, the Netzarim axis, and Kuwait Square. So basically, they're going to move to the periphery of Gaza. If you've seen the Gaza Strip, which I don't have an image for you right now, unfortunately, but I'm sure you guys have seen it many times on the map. It's a long strip, 7 miles wide, 26 miles long. And The IDF would withdraw not from the Gaza Strip, but to the edges of the Gaza Strip and to areas they've mostly destroyed, most specifically probably in the north of Gaza. Okay. And then point 2, air activity restrictions, a temporary suspension of military and reconnaissance air operations in Gaza for 10 hours daily, extended to 12 hours on days when hostages and prisoners are released. Why is this a big deal? Because the Israelis are constantly observing what's happening in Gaza. They have drones flying over, and Hamas is able, I mean, these guys have to work, they have to be as clandestine as they possibly can in order to conceal their activities. They don't want to know where the hostages are, which means they don't want them to know where the tunnels are, which means they need, especially if they're going to give up the hostages and transport them through the city and trade them, they need to know that Israel's not watching them. Otherwise, they won't give up the hostages. So for 10 to 12 hours a day, Israel's going to say, okay, we won't fly drones over. And obviously, Hamas is able to see and hear these drones in the air. And so once they know that they're not in the air, then they'll bring them above ground, and then they'll move them, and then they'll trade them. Okay, number 3, return of displaced persons and military withdrawals. By day 7, following the release of 7 Palestinian detainees, Israeli forces will withdraw entirely from El Rashid Street eastward to Salahuddin Street, dismantling all military positions. Displaced persons will return to their homes without weapons, and humanitarian aid will flow freely through El Rashid Street from the first day. Day 22, Israeli forces will withdraw from central Gaza to areas closer to the border, dismantling military positions. Displaced persons will continue returning to their homes across Gaza, and freedom of movement for residents will persist. Remember, a lot of these people are in the south. They're in tents. They're on the beach. They're freezing to death. They're going to be able to move more and more to their homes. Humanitarian aid, point 4. From the first day, significant amounts of humanitarian aid, relief supplies, and fuel will enter Gaza. 600 trucks daily, including 50 fuel trucks. This includes fuel for electricity generation, trade, rubble removal, and operating hospitals, clinics, and bakeries. 5, hostage and prisoner exchange. This is key, okay? All of it is important, but these are going to be the most important. Hamas will release 33 Israeli hostages, alive or dead. Okay, this is a key point because many of them, nobody knows whether they're alive or dead. I'm sure even Hamas doesn't even know because these guys are operating decentralized. They're not communicating for fear of interception. So Hamas probably doesn't even know who's actually alive. But they've agreed to give them alive or dead. So if they're dead, they return their bodies, including women and children under 19 and elderly individuals over 40 and injured or sick civilians. So Hamas will prioritize releasing, okay, the most I guess, fragile or vulnerable of their hostages, which are the elderly, the injured, the sick, and the young, and the women especially, okay? For each Israeli released, Israel will release 30 Palestinian minors or women. For each Israeli female soldier released, Israel will release 50 Palestinian prisoners, okay? So basically multiply 33 by 30 or 50, and that will give you the range of how many Palestinians will be released, okay? So you don't know the exact number because we don't know how many women are going to be released. 6, the release schedule. On day 1, Hamas releases 3 Israeli civilian hostages. By day 7, Hamas releases 4 additional Israeli civilians. Every 7 days, 3 more hostages will be released, prioritizing women. By the 6th week, Hamas will release all the hostages included in this phase, and Israel will release a corresponding number of Palestinian prisoners. Hamas will provide information on the number of hostages to be released by day 7. Okay, so why are they releasing them in phases? It's obviously because many of you in the chat are pointing out that you can't trust the Zionists. So Hamas has been worried from the beginning that if they give up the hostages, there'll be nothing stopping them from going beyond what they're doing in Gaza. They're already committing genocide. They'll do even worse, okay, if they don't have any leverage. And the only leverage they have left are what remaining hostages there are. And so to extend the amount of time during this ceasefire, they're going to release the civilians and hostages in phases, okay, little by little to extend it over time. And if they continue fighting again, at least Hamas had a month or two in order to get fuel and more supplies, and then they can continue fighting, which is hopefully not the case, but that's the best that Hamas can ask for at this point. Okay, we're going to read the final points here. Point 7, rearrested prisoners and exiled individuals. By week 6, Israel will release 47 Palestinians that were rearrested after the 2011 exchange deal. Now, in 2011, Hamas was able to capture the soldier Gilad. They captured him prior to 2011. They captured Gilad Shalit. They held him for several years, and then in 2011 they traded him. And they traded him for many, many Palestinian hostages. Among them was Yahya Sinwar. And Yahya Sinwar was released and eventually became the head of Hamas in Gaza, and he planned October 7th. And actually, that was the logic behind the October 7th attack, was that we had a successful exchange with Israel by capturing one soldier, Gilad Shalit. What if on October 7th we do a military raid and we capture dozens of soldiers? How many could we trade them for? Well, we all know what happened, right? They not only captured a lot of soldiers, they ended up, causing a lot of mayhem, and then the Israelis killed their own people, and then it became this, right? So despite the chaos, there was some logic behind it. Okay. Now, Israel will release all women and children under the age of 19 detained since October 7th of 2023. So all the women and children captured in the last year. Now, I think there are at least 10,000 Palestinian hostages held by Israel. The women and children under 19 will be released. And then 8 conditions: compliance with the agreement, including halting military operations, Israeli troop withdrawal, and humanitarian aid, will determine the continuation of exchanges. Released Palestinian prisoners cannot be rearrested for the same charges or forced to sign release conditions. Okay, now these conditions are likely to be, these are likely violations that Israel is going to violate, at least if not in the first 40 days, afterwards for sure. They will definitely rearrest Palestinians. Unfortunately, there's very little Palestinians can do about that, but it is a condition that Hamas is, emphasizing. Okay, phase 2, 42 days. Number 9, negotiations for phase 2. Indirect negotiations will begin by day 16 to define the terms of phase 2, including the release of soldiers and other prisoners. Agreements must be finalized by week 5. Okay, so what does this tell you? This deal is very fragile. This could very easily be temporary. Okay, this could end easily within 42 days. And it could end sooner, because on negotiations, when they start on day 16, if a final agreement isn't agreed to by week 5, if they feel like the deal's collapsing, they might just abandon the first phase altogether. Okay, so definitely people will be released, but it's possible that this first phase collapses entirely within 2 to 3 weeks. It depends on what happens, because you have to imagine hostages are going to be released. The families of the hostages are either going to receive dead loved ones, living loved ones, or no loved ones. Okay? Those who don't get their loved ones back are going to be jealous and upset for those who received their living loved ones back. Those who get their living loved ones back are going to be incredibly emotional, but angry that it took this long. And then when they hear the stories of what happened, of course, they're going to tell them what the hostages have always been telling people when they return to Israel, before the government and the media manipulates them. They say, we were actually treated quite well by Hamas. They fed us. They gave us what little food they had. They helped us when we were injured. They took care of us. Despite the fact that we were hostages, we were more afraid of Israel killing us than Hamas killing us. So this will make them very angry. And then the people who receive dead loved ones, they're going to be very upset, obviously, that they have to bury their loved ones. We've all seen what their funerals look like. They're going to be crying and wailing, and they're going to be very angry because other people they know, families of the hostages, got living loved ones back. They're getting dead loved ones back, and they could have been alive if Netanyahu hadn't delayed it. So even though the first phase is sensitive and could collapse, what Netanyahu's worried about, obviously, is that this could collapse his government, and then it's going to be hard for them to go back to war. So we don't know what's going to happen in this first phase, but that's the point of point 9, negotiations for phase 2. Okay, point 10, transition to sustainable calm. A permanent ceasefire will take effect before further prisoner exchanges, including the release of all Israeli soldiers and civilians in return for an agreed number of Palestinian prisoners. Israeli forces will fully withdraw from Gaza. Okay, now phase 2, based on point 9, okay, they will define the terms of phase 2. And in number 10 says phase 2 will include a permanent ceasefire, but those terms have not been clearly defined yet, as you can see by point 9, okay? So I know I'm getting into the details here, but we might as well if there's going to be you guys need to know what to fully expect, okay? So it seems like Hamas is trying to Israel won't agree to define terms, because Israel, what are they saying this entire time? We're not going to stop this war. We're going to remove Hamas entirely, right? Well, Hamas's hope is that by phase 2, okay, they can actually get them to fully withdraw from Gaza if the political situation can collapse on Netanyahu within phase 1. And so even though the terms won't be defined, they're trying to at least, the mediators maybe are trying to show Hamas, okay, Israel won't agree to it. We'll have to define these terms in phase 2, but when we get there, then we'll talk about a permanent ceasefire. So they're already kind of hinting at some of these terms, basically. Sorry to drag this out, but I just want to give you guys a heads up, because this isn't like a permanent ceasefire. This is a pause, okay? So, and it's a pause for 42 days, and it could collapse during that 42 days. But the entire point is, hopefully for Hamas and the people of Gaza, is to get to phase 2 where it could be permanent. Okay, phase 3, 42 days. Number 11, final exchanges and infrastructure rebuilding. Both sides will exchange bodies of deceased individuals once identified. A comprehensive Gaza reconstruction plan will be implemented over 3 to 5 years, including rebuilding homes, infrastructure, and compensating affected individuals. Egypt, Qatar, and the UN will oversee this process. Okay, now you have to imagine this is just fluff here. We hope this will be the case. And historically in the past, this has been the case. But we've never had a war this big before. We've never had a genocide like this before. And we've never had Israel this serious about like, no, we're going to eliminate Hamas entirely this time. So if the terms for the exact terms aren't defined for phase 2 yet, you have to believe phase 3 is sure as hell not defined. And Israel can't be trusted. They will likely get to maybe phase 2, and then once they have all the hostages back, they're not going to agree to ever see Gaza get completely rebuilt, because their objective has been to dump these people all over the world. Leave. We're ethnically cleansing you. We'll either kill you, starve you, or forcibly remove you. So they're probably not going to allow this to happen, but the hope, obviously, for Gaza is that this will happen. So, point 12, freedom of movement and trade. Border crossings will open to allow free movement of goods and people. I don't think this is going to happen. Israel has taken over the Philadelphia corridor, which is the border between Hamas and Egypt, and they insisted on that because they don't want anything entering Gaza without their knowing. And so if they're going to like refuse to ever leave there, then there will never be free movement of goods or people into the Gaza Strip. But the hope is that we can get there, right? So the guarantees are by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. They'll serve as guarantors of the agreement. Humanitarian organizations, including the UN, will provide ongoing support and monitor compliance throughout all phases. Okay, so this is basically the ceasefire deal. It is tentative. It's fragile. It was agreed to originally back in July, 6 months ago, 7 months ago at this point. But now, because Netanyahu is under pressure domestically, which he always has been, but now because there's a real possibility of peace, he's under growing pressure. But more importantly, it's Donald Trump. Donald Trump is telling Netanyahu, wrap this war up. Now, Netanyahu and Trump have been friends and allies in the past. Earlier in the video, if you're just tuning in, go ahead and rewind and you'll see I explained how that relationship has been on thin ice for some time because Netanyahu embarrassed Trump several years ago. And Trump is, an egotistical, prideful guy, and he's about winning, and no one can flex on him, not even Netanyahu. So he is putting pressure on Netanyahu now. I'm not coming into office with this mess on my hands. Get this over with. And, he's been threatening Gaza. I'm going to, bring all hell. But he also has been threatening Netanyahu, basically, and he did so by tweeting out something embarrassing. If you want to know the details, go ahead and rewind in this video, and you'll see. Now, there are a lot of reasons why this deal could collapse within phase 1, but there are also reasons why it could lead to phase 2 and 3 and hopefully bring an end to this. The political situation for Netanyahu, when these hostages come home and they get buried, or they get to go home and talk to the media and their loved ones, these hostages are going to be able to talk about what they went through. People are going to be very angry at Netanyahu. And if he agrees to this at all, the coalition that held up Netanyahu's government, the far right, they're going to abandon him potentially. And then if they want to restart the violence, Netanyahu, he might not allow it. Trump may not allow Netanyahu to do this at all. Okay? So why? I mean, there's a lot of reasons why. Trump is coming in with an agenda, and he doesn't want any distractions. He doesn't want any reason for people to be protesting him, right? Last time Trump became president, liberals were on the street protesting him like crazy. The liberals are kind of exhausted. They feel defeated. There is no political motivation to obstruct right now. They might start blaming him for genocide if Israel continues their war, and so he doesn't want this mess. I think he also doesn't want any reason to bump heads with Iran, especially given that the war is continuing between Russia and Ukraine. There's beef with China. He's trying to do this whole Greenland thing. Like, he has his own agenda coming in. He doesn't want Netanyahu obstructing it. So this could lead potentially, hopefully, to this agreement holding. Now, this isn't set in stone. It might be by the end of this live stream. I don't know. I got to check the news, but we have reason to believe that this is going to come to an end. So, before I let you guys go, I am going to introduce you now. Oh, actually, sorry. In the comments, in the chat, let me know what you think, okay? And I'm going to reread these messages. I've been busy presenting, but I will read these messages. If you liked this video, please consider subscribing to our channel. Also, if you'd like to support what we do, please consider becoming a paid subscriber on our website, where we post exclusive documentaries, podcasts, and videos just like this one about geopolitics, current events, and history. We built this website because of continued censorship of our videos, so please do consider becoming a member. Until next time.